everyone, and welcome to Money Matters. As you know by now, Money Matters is an interactive show that aims to educate all our viewers on money-related matters. If you have a money-related matter or question that you would like to pass by through us, please do engage with us and use the hashtag MM on SID, and we'll see how we can address that question. But for today, and lined up, is a conversation that most of us hardly talk about, and that is death, right? We're not necessarily talking about death, but we are looking into a deceased estate. What does that mean, and what are some of the things that we ought to put in place just to make sure that when we leave this earth, when we do die, and pass away, what is it that we are leaving behind for our families or our relatives? And joining me to talk about this very important conversation is Thabiseng Dubazana. She is, of course, an MD, right, of her own practice, Dubazana Attorneys. And welcome, and thank you for joining us.
Thank you so much for having me. Very important topic that we're dealing with today.
It's a very important topic that we are indeed dealing with. Tell us a bit about yourself.
Sure. Thabiseng Dubazana is a founder, director at Dubazana Attorneys. She did her articles in 2012 with another very brilliant company, and then as a result, she went on to be a legal advisor. And after that, she went back into practice after 2 years of being a legal advisor. And then went back into practice because, litigation never leaves you, really.
Yeah.
And after 3 years of being back in practice, she decided, no, it's time to open my own practice. I think I can do more. And as a result, it has opened up opportunities to build platforms such as this to speak on the law, because that is my passion. I love educating about what the law is, because when you work with people, you realize that people don't really understand what the law is. So I've had the opportunity to be on various radio platforms, various television platforms, talking about what I love. And it's brought me here today.
And it's brought you here today. And thank you so much for saying yes, number one, when you were called to actually come and help us understand. I say it's quite a sensitive topic because we don't talk about it, right? We hardly ever want to think about death, even if it's one of the things that are quite sure, right? If there are two things that are certain in life, it's death and taxes.
Correct.
But we hardly ever talk about death, right? And I suppose it's important that we have this conversation this morning. Let's first discuss, the importance of setting up a will, and why should all of us have a will in place, especially when you have children, relatives. Why is it important that we actually set up a will?
It is so important because you don't want to have disputes on how your estate should be distributed. You know what you want. You know how it is that you want your affairs to be dealt with. And therefore, you don't want to leave it to chance by not leaving a will. So also to be, put it out there so it's known is it the second or third week in September? I forget. But it's a wills week. Where people get to go to any attorney's firm and draft a will for free. You don't have to pay for a consultation or anything of the sort. Take advantage of that. Approach an attorney's firm and draft a will. So there's a good friend of mine who once said that you as a person, you are your estate. You are your own money. You are the product of your estate. So as a result, you know what it is that you want and you know what has to go to whom. So put that in a will. And there is the misconception that the will has to deal with only monetary or immovable property, stuff like that. It can be something as precious as from your mother's teaspoon that she fed you with when you were a kid and you wanted to continue into the family. Put that in the will. It can be about how you want to be buried, where you want to be buried. If you want to be cremated, you put that in a will. If you want to be an organ donor, put that in a will. All of those things, you can put anything and everything about you and your estate in a will.
Just express all your desires and wishes and make sure that they are recorded on paper, because that's what I'm hearing, right?
Correct.
Don't just tell someone about what your wishes and desires are, but actually record them and make sure that they are recorded and formally so. in a document that we now refer to as a will.
Yes.
It's an express will of how I would like, as you said, my estate to be dealt with in the event that I actually pass away. Should I hire an attorney, in making me understand the entire process, or can I actually, just wing it?
When it comes to drafting a will, I would suggest you do. Like I said, there's a point whereby firms do wills for free, so you don't really have to pay for that. But when it comes to actually dealing with a deceased estate, you actually have no choice. With the estate of the deceased is over 250,000 in its entirety, you have no choice but to appoint. Yes.
I'm like thinking, what are you talking about?
If the entire estate is over 250,000 rand,
you
have to appoint an attorney to deal with the matter. So there's a difference. If the estate is below 250,000 rands, then you get a letter of authority, which you can go to any magistrate court without any assistance of an attorney, and you can distribute and deal with it in that manner. But once it goes over 250,000, then you have to go get what we call letters of executorship. And now you have to go to the master of the High Court. And if you don't have an agent is the attorney who's assisting you in this matter. If you don't have an agent assisting you with this, they will send you back. Go find an attorney who's going to help you with this matter. We're not exactly going to be executors of the estate because the letter of executorship is given to you, but we're going to be acting in the background so that we can help you move this thing along. You wouldn't have the kinds of connections we have in order to publish the estate in the government gazette, for example, to publish it in the newspapers, to draw up the L&D liquidation and distribution account, to ensure that your estate duty is paid, that it's tax that you pay when you die. By the way, it doesn't stop. It hasn't stopped to write letters to the different banks to see if there's any debts that you have, to see if there's any monies that are put away so that we can assist you in opening an estate late account where all the monies of the deceased get paid into the estate late account. If there's outstanding home loans that are there to assist you in, if there's a surviving spouse, for example, how to assist them to transfer the loan from the deceased fully into the spouse. All of these things, those things are very expensive, and if you don't know where to go, you will be stuck. And then the estate just kind of stands still.
Yeah. So what gives me relief, though, is that even in the event, if I, for example, I do not necessarily tell my family or my spouse where all the monies are at, is that part of the function of the attorney, or is to make sure that they collate all that information, or at least the money, locate.
Yeah.
How easy is it to locate all the money?
It's quite easy. So what happens is that once you've given an attorney a mandate or consent to now proceed with the matter, we draft letters to all the heads of the banks, like all the head departments of the banks, and say, with this power of attorney, and that goes to the letter of executorship that you would have as the surviving person, with all of these, we send it to the bank and say, please give us information
about
if there's anything there. And then if there's anything there, they'll write back and then say, please give us the account number for the estate late account so we can deposit the money in there. They won't give it to the attorney. It has to go into the estate late account, right? So it is an interest-bearing account, so that whenever everything is done and dusted, once you've advertised the estate in the newspapers and the government gazettes and all of that, any creditor that comes forward has to be paid from the estate late account. And once all debts are paid and the master's fees are paid and all of that, then the agent in this situation will then be entitled to 3.5% of the estate, and then the rest is yours to do what it is that you need to do to move on.
Before the costs or after the cost?
Yes.
Before the cost. Is the 3.5% before or after the cost?
It is before the cost.
Before the cost, whatever the value of the estate was.
Correct.
For the payment of any party.
Yeah.
Okay, that's good. That's quite interesting. What are some of the various types, or the different types of deceased estates that one could find? Especially in the South African context.
So we have intestate succession, which is when
succession.
Yes, which is when you die without a will. And then we have testate succession.
Okay.
When you die with a will. So they are both governed by different acts. The testate succession is governed by the Wills Act. Intestate succession is governed by the Intestate Succession Act. estate. And that's where the difference is, literally. Intestate, yes.
And the different laws that apply.
Correct. And so with the wills one, it's kind of straightforward. It's basically if the will adheres to Section 2 of the Wills Act, wherein it's properly executed, in that you are clear in who the executor is, it is written down, it is witnessed by persons who are over the age of 14, 2 of them. And if you can't sign or write for yourself, if the person that you've appointed to sign or on your behalf there, it has to be done in the presence of a commissioner of oaths, who can be an attorney, a police officer, whatever the case may be. And then if all of those things are done properly, then the will is considered to be, legitimate, and it can go ahead. Doesn't mean that people haven't tried to take wills to court and say it's not legit. That's exactly what it is. And then intestate succession basically deals with the fact that if you did not leave a will, we now deal with the nearest surviving relative. This is where it gets complicated. So if you're married, it depends what kind of marriage regime you're in. So if you're married in commutative property, that's a whole thing on its own. If you're married out of commutative property with the option of accrual, and then there's out of commutative property without the option of accrual. So this will determine how we deal with your intestate succession situation. So I think the one that is most common, though, it is marriage in commutative property, which includes customary marriages. There's a thing that I've been hearing a lot, and it's not true. I think maybe I should say it here. When mahadi / lobola is paid,
dowry, as other people.
Exactly. You're married in commutative property with immediate effect. Whether or not there was a ceremony to accept makoti into the family, whether or not the mahadi was paid in full, even if 50 rand was paid.
The fact that there was an exchange.
It is sufficient, and you're married in community of property. So if that relationship dies, go and get a divorce.
Wow.
Because, yes, you have to go get a divorce. Because if you marry somebody else, be it civilly or still customarily, that marriage is null and void. This person that you left has all the rights over that property.
Listen, I want you to pause it there. Because we need to take a quick ad break. And I think for our viewers at home, as you heard it, you ought to be very careful of how you conduct your affairs. But please continue conversing with us. Share your thoughts and opinions on this very exciting and interesting topic that we are talking about. Tell us what you think of what Nthabi Singh has just shared with us. Don't forget to tag us #MM on SID, and we'll see you just after this. Welcome back, and you are still tuned into Money Matters, and of course we are talking deceased estates. And the reason I laugh is because just before the ad break, Nthabi Singh was just sharing shocking stories with us on how you ought to handle your affairs. Make sure that when you pay dowry, or when you pay lobola as we know it in South Africa, make sure that when you leave your partner, there are certain things that you ought to be doing. Nthabi Singh, I need to divorce.
Yes.
My partner needs to divorce me.
Correct.
Before they actually get into another marital relationship.
That is very correct.
Let's just unpack that shocking statement.
There is the misconception that when lobola, dowry, mahadi are paid, that it's an engagement.
Yeah.
Not in terms of our law. Actually, not even in terms of the past. But anyway, let's deal with
the law as we know it now. Yeah.
So in terms of the law, there's been so many debates in different courts on how to recognize customary marriages. And of course, there's certain elements in different tribes, how it is that they say it is a complete marriage once this, that, and that has happened. For example, if there's a celebration to Amuhera to accept the bride into the family and all of that, then they believe it is a marriage. But courts have come to a decision, basically, saying that as long as there has been a request, which is that letter that is signed by the uncles at the meeting, that confirms that we are here to ask the hand in marriage of Ntabiseng from the Dubazana family, and we are here from X family. That is the basis point. It confirms that there's a customary marriage.
Yeah.
And then if there's pictures, there's a celebrity that's happened that in our country who is now apparently paying towards maintenance of her ex-husband by virtue of a picture.
Wow.
The picture that was taken after the Mahadi celebrations were done. So if the pictures, they worked to show that there was, you know what I mean? There was a marriage celebrated. And as a result, those are things that the courts consider in saying that, therefore, based on this, there is sufficient evidence to say that there is a marriage between X and Y.
And between X and Y. Wow. Sure. I think we just need to down it with a bit of water and just absorb that whole knowledge that you've just shared with us. But quite on an interesting note, though, South Africa as a state, do or do we not practice heirship, and why?
It used to be a situation of primogeniture, to be more specific. So in other words, females, women, were not permitted to inherit, period.
Anything.
Okay. So in 2004, there was a case called the Bear case, BHE, and that changed everything.
Wait. 2004 in South Africa?
Correct.
Okay.
That recent. Yeah. So that changed everything in terms of how succession is going to be dealt with when it comes to women. Because it used to be that if your husband dies, everything that you accumulated with your husband throughout the marriage wasn't yours. And if you didn't birth a boy child, you would be asked to, vacate. So if you built a mansion, if you had businesses and all of that, those were not yours. So as soon as he dies, you need to vacate the premises. And the nearest surviving male relative will then take over everything. And it used to be in the past that not only does he take over the material things that were accumulated, but also you, as the wife, become the wife to this.
Say the brother.
The brother.
Yeah.
Right? But now in 2004, that was changed. And as a result, it means now that females can now inherit from the deceased estate of a man. So even if if let's say as the wife had died prior to dad or the husband dying, if you left only girl children, they were not going to inherit anything. They were not going to benefit anything. They had no hope of surviving outside on their own if they became orphans, and then they became the problem of the government if no other family member were to take them in.
That's sure. Okay, that's quite interesting. Let's talk about, we spoke about, wills being contested in court.
Yes.
What happens when I've got, X person on my will to inherit and they reject the assets? What happens in that case?
It actually happens more often than not.
Yeah.
So sometimes it will be a situation wherein, let's say you inherit immovable property and then there's a usufruct. A usufruct is a condition wherein you are saying you own this house on condition that you allow Ntabiseng to reside in it as well until she dies, and then the person is like, no, I'm not about to do that. That rejection has to be in writing. It can't just be a verbal rejection. So that that part of the estate will be dealt with in terms of intestate succession, because it's not being dealt with under the Wills Act because you rejected that part. So now we will then see the nearest relative who can now inherit that property that comes with the usufruct. Sometimes you'd find that it is a farm And then as a farm, you need to pay a certain amount. Maybe there's a debt owed on the farm. In order for you to own that farm, you need to pay X amount. You can reject that. Sometimes it can be just you don't want it.
Yeah.
And you're like, no, it's okay. Just
Can do that.
I can do without this. It's fine. And then you just need to put it in writing, and then it can be dealt with in terms of interstate succession.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Let's just unpack some of the complications when someone dies without a will. I know we've touched a bit on it and the law that then kicks in if there was no will in place.
Yeah.
But let's talk about some of the complications really that, we want our viewers to understand. That if I don't have a will in place and I've accumulated assets, right, throughout my years of living, what complications am I actually presenting to my relatives?
Well, let's start with marriage in community of property. That is the most complicated one that I've come across. When you're married in community of property, your estate is bound in one, so it's 100%. And in that 100%, you each own 50-50. Upon your death, you only die or take 50% of that entire estate. So your surviving spouse still has their 50%. Therefore, your spouse is entitled to 50% of your 50%, which therefore makes that from that 100, the spouse now has 75, basically, right? And then if there's children born of the marriage, then they are entitled to what we call a child's share, which is either equivalent to 125,000, and still that surviving spouse still has a claim in the child's share part.
There's no way.
So they can ending up with another 15 or 10% from there.
That's 85.
And then
to 90.
Exactly. And then this is where issues actually come up. How dare you take this much money from my brothers? It's always the other way around. How dare you take from my brother's estate, my brother's this, and all of that? Not understanding the marriage regime
that the partners
chose allows this person to do this. And then as a result, there's also the situation where when we see money, it's mine. It's not yours. Even if you're a surviving spouse or a surviving child, etc., it's not yours. It has to first go into the estate late account so you can deal with the estate of the deceased. So it has to pay tax.
So where you had life insurance, it's not yours.
That's another thing that you raise that is very important. When you have life insurance, name a beneficiary. And in that also be specific that X amount will be used to pay estate duty. Because if there is no money that comes out to pay estate duty, it will come from the money in the estate late account. And then usually it depletes everything.
No way.
And then the estate ends up being insolvent. And nobody inherits anything as a result. The unfortunate thing about estate duty, the way it's calculated, it doesn't subtract. So if when you died, you had bought a house worth 1.5 million, right? And then when you died, there was a balance of 500,000. It doesn't subtract what you've paid. It adds. So it's 1.5 plus 500,000. And if you had loans to 600,000, so it is 1.5 plus 500 plus 600. And then if you had assets worth 2 million plus 2 million, do you understand? So it keeps going up instead of subtracting. That was a shocker to me back in the day when I saw that, how it's done. And then as a result, it becomes over 3.5 million and you're bound to pay estate duty. That is exactly. So you need to always have money set aside to pay estate duty. You're going to pay tax one way or the other.
Shucks. See, I'm like jaw dropped. I have no words, as you can see, because I'm just like thinking, oh my gosh, the government just keeps taking and taking. No, the state takes, not the government. Let me separate.
Yeah.
Between the government and the state.
Yeah.
It just keeps taking. Unclaimed inheritances in South Africa. How does that work? And how prevalent is it in our environment?
For our community, it is so high. People don't know that you should report a deceased estate. And if you don't, things like pension fund money, that has to get paid out. It never gets paid out. It sits there. and then monies that were particularly under interstate succession, monies that were supposed to go to minors and all of that, especially if they were under investment portfolios and all of those kinds of things, they won't get paid out to those individuals until the estate has been dealt with and wound up. So it will just sit there, and then they eventually get paid into the master's coffers. And then there's billions sitting in the master's office unclaimed.
But they can never write it off.
They can't. And I think is it a 30-year period? I stand to be corrected.
There's a lot of
Yes, for you to go and claim monies that are due to you. Same thing in the pensions and provident funds. People don't know that there were named beneficiaries there, and then they just sit and let things go, and money just sits there. And then there are other situations whereby there was no one named as a beneficiary, but you do have a right to go and claim as a surviving heir, relative to this person. So there's a lot of money sitting there that goes unclaimed.
What I'm hearing from you is that there's a lot of information that we as individuals need to acquaint ourselves with, just make sure that we really understand.
Yes.
Because like you said, it's a lot. And I wish we could go on, but unfortunately we really come to the end of our conversation. It was a lovely one, I must say. And thank you so much, so much, Nthabiseng, for gracing us. And I pray that, God may bless you and that your business may continue to prosper. And for our viewers at home, that is it. We have come to the end of this very, very important topic, discussing deceased estate. And from what I hear, we need to make sure that we understand, that we educate ourselves, and we know what is at stake depending on how we want to structure our estates. So let's make sure that we educate ourselves, that we pick from what Nthabiseng has brought to the table, and that we expand our knowledge as we learn a lot more about how to handle our estates better. But for me, Joy Malete, and the rest of the Money Matters team, it is goodbye and God bless.